is probably something that's on a lot of our minds right now in today's world. There's a lot of people and community and causes in which we want to see justice. And I think what's really amazing about our speaker today is that he'll be speaking not just on something that's important to him, but something he's taking action on. And I hope that we can all leave inspired to take action on these causes that we believe need to see justice. And so please help me welcome Casper up here talking on the theme of justice.
All right, thank you so much for that awesome intro. It's so great to just not be at work right now. Just as a heads up, I'm probably going to be talking about some sort of difficult subjects today. Obviously with the theme, I might be talking about some of the things that are deemed the worst crimes people can commit. But also I wanted to touch base on just how, justice is enacted in our everyday life and how we correspond with justice. For ABO, our beliefs on justice are rooted in our day-to-day activity. It shaped the creation of this collective, and ABO Comics was formed in 2017 by 3 queer kids in a community garden. It initially was just going to be a fun project. We were going to do a one-off anthology. We were going to work with some of the people we had already been working with in prison. So our first step was we put out a call for submissions through Black and Pink's monthly newspaper, which goes to thousands of prisoners all over the nation. A few months later, we had received dozens of submissions from artists all over the US. We had fundraised enough money to buy our own printing press, and after an almost unnecessarily difficult publishing process, a couple of self-taught queers published the first edition of ABO Comics, Queer Prisoners Anthology. And the artwork here is made by one of my good friends who's been incarcerated in Texas for the last almost 20 years now. So as of today, one of our co-founders is no longer involved because of capacity issues, and the other moved out of state and helps with sales and merchandising and some consulting work for us. When we first created this collective, we had a lot of conversations and a lot of discussions. We talked about today's subject a lot, justice. And I eventually realized we had different views on what that looked like, even though we all had the same ultimate goal of prison abolition. We knew we all wanted a world without prisons, but we kind of disagreed about how to get there. It seems like that with enough discussions, you're going to inevitably start disagreeing with the people you agree with. And all of us having kind of different views on what justice looked like, figuring out the direction we wanted to go with the collective proved more difficult than we thought it would be. And I think it seems kind of ridiculous that 3 queer Bay Area leftists have such a difficult time defining justice. But the issue with it is that it is purely conceptual and it's just an idea. And depending on your beliefs, it's something that we just made up. Some people would argue justice is just as real as the Easter Bunny or Tony the Tiger or white Jesus. But for a very long time, maybe since I was a child, I've not had faith in our justice system. This is me back when I was a little girl. FTP actually stands for fuck the people who put me in this dress. But, don't worry, I went to a monster truck rally afterwards, it was fine. But all jokes aside, a lack of faith in our system seems to be a strong sentiment, especially here in the Bay Area. Some of us say the system is broken. Some of us say the system isn't broken, but is designed to work exactly the way it does. Either way, many of us feel the need to find something better than what we currently have. In 2018, a poll by the ACLU said that only 8% of Americans reported being happy with our current judicial system. So everyone has a different idea of what it should look like. Some people think that justice should not be punitive and only met with compassion and nonviolence and strawberries and rainbows, and I'm one of those people. But some people are in favor of literally torturing human beings. And in thinking about that, I realized that if we can't even agree on the definition of justice, how are we going to be able to figure out a system that even works for the majority of us? And as we all know, the world is not always equitable or impartial or objective. The world does not have a lack of bias, which means seeking justice sometimes is an oxymoron. which is why I think the idea of our justice system is a really good one in theory. The idea that we present an issue to people who are not involved, they hear all the facts, and then they decide the proper route of action. But I think due to the moral failure of individuals, communities, and businesses, it's resulted in the US having the highest incarceration rate in the entire world. We have 2.3 million people behind bars here today. So where do we go from here? Well, understanding how the prison industrial complex formed is important to not only deconstruct it, but to make sure it doesn't happen again or become even worse. And speaking of some historical context, here's this super not historically accurate clip from Quentin Tarantino's Hateful Eight. I think this clip in particular poses an interesting look at the different forms of justice we might have right now. Well, here we have a good example of another person I disagree with about justice. They would really never let me make movies in Hollywood. But this clip, I think, poses an interesting look at some current realities. We have the judicial system, which is kind of like the hangman in this scenario. But I wonder if we can think of any other groups that kind of represent frontier justice. Do we have any sort of modern day examples that emulate public persecution or the mob mentality? I wonder if anybody wants to just throw some stuff out there.
Twitter,
all right, yeah?
Callout culture.
Callout culture, definitely. Anybody else? No, I think you're all right on the mark there. Well, so instead of shining the light on people we disagree with, I think, yeah, we should definitely reflect on the people we do agree with. And seeing how we are in the Bay Area, I think it's pretty safe to say the majority of us at least lean left. And so to challenge our own beliefs and preconceptions today, I wanted to turn the camera inwards on ourselves and self-reflect. We have the social justice movement here in 2019, which, bear with me, of course, has its similarities to the frontier justice in this clip. And I was nervous about it because I know it verges into unpopular territory. And for so much of my life, I considered myself kind of on the front lines of the social justice movement. It's always been very important to me. And it's only now that I'm entering into my 30s that I'm starting to become a little bit more critical and self-reflective. And I'm realizing that the issues that we have with the judicial system cross over into the social justice movement a lot. And I think that's for the most part because we're not always objective. We don't have a lack of bias either. And it's not any more so than the people who sit in a courtroom. We just generally tend to have less facts. So I'm seeing a lot of times that we're trying so hard to do the right things for the right reasons, but some of the things we end up doing are the wrong things for the right reasons. And I'm not sure that this is going to change anybody's mind today, because if I had come to this Creative Morning speech 2 years ago and I had listened to somebody saying this exact same speech, I probably would have taken a lot of issue with it. It probably wouldn't have changed my mind. But in the last 2 years, I've found that having real conversations with people you both love and disagree with politically that don't devolve into name calling or personal attacks can make you a more compassionate, well-rounded, and insightful individual. And I've found now more than ever in 2019, with everything that is going on in our political climate, it's more important than ever to take our conversations off the internet and have them face-to-face. I think a lot of the times we get our information from a bad game of telephone. We hear something on the internet, it's been misconstrued, it's been taken out of context, it's been passed around so many times that we don't even know what's really happening, and we are very quick to pass on judgment for it. Something that has been really interesting to me lately is if we take any of our political beliefs that we feel very strongly about, whether that be like abortion or gun control or your thoughts on economics, and then if we search that in Google, but we also add the word debunked to the end. And if you spend enough time researching something you firmly disagree with, you may start to find your arguments can be a little bit juvenile, that you're just arguing against a caricature and not another intelligent, rational person who has probably spent the same amount of time you have considering this subject, but has come to a different conclusion. then imagine somebody who maybe has all the same information you do, but more information, and has still come to a different conclusion. And that's what has happened to me a lot recently with the conversations in my life. It's given me a little bit of humility in realizing that just because someone might sit on the opposite side of the political aisle from me doesn't mean I'm correct or morally superior. And I had initially planned to kind of come up here and give you like a 45-minute infomercial on ABO Comics and be like, ABO Comics, it slices, it dices, it helps put money into people's commissary accounts. And while I definitely think we could go toe-to-toe with ShamWow any day, I'd rather talk about a lot of recent thoughts that have been rattling around my brain. So don't worry though, I think once you all leave here, you're going to be licensed therapists from hearing me hash out these thoughts. But you might need to double check on that because I'm not 100% sure. So this last month, as I was preparing for this speech, I was seeing so many examples in our community of people who are talking a big game about transformative justice processes, but kind of are doing the opposite of that. Like, we'll talk all day and night about transformative justice and restorative justice and justice, but we kind of ignore everything except what those things have in common, which is justice, of course. We seem more focused on radical change than we are on actual equity. And I think if everyone were to sit down and define what justice really looked like for them, had a clear definition, then we could actually really transform things. And while the vast majority of people, I think, seem to have good intentions, I think we know what the road to hell is paved with. The story I really wanted to highlight today is an event that changed my mind about frontier justice. And it was uncomfortable, and I really went back and forth on whether or not I wanted to share this because I'm gonna have to be super vulnerable with you all. But I think it's really important to share. So about a month ago, I got sent some screenshots that were going around online. And the screenshots were of a post on Instagram calling out a sexual abuser in our community. There were multiple claims of really, really serious, but kind of vague allegations of a person who had been sexually involved with minors. The post said that the person had slept with underage girls and were accused of being kicked out of a community event for assaulting a minor. The post was growing around a bunch of social media sites, and there were lots of comments saying stuff like, fuck this person, don't let them into our scenes, don't support them, or any of their work. And I kind of went into panic mode because the person named in these social media posts was someone I started up ABO Comics with. So this person, let's call them Person A, is someone who really has done so much good for our community over the last few years. And more importantly, a friend who helped make me a better person during a very, very difficult time in my life when I had just started transitioning. So, and even one step past that, somebody I had been romantically involved with in the past. So it was very, very conflicting when I saw these posts because my heart said, you know, I know that this person would never do this, I know them so well. But then my brain said, just because that's not my experience with this person doesn't mean that this story isn't true. And also, selfishly, and this one's really hard to admit, I thought, how is this going to affect the work that we've done with ABO Comics? Is this going to kind of ruin everything that we've worked so hard for? Is this going to tear it down? Is this going to be our last time that I can even show my face with this organization? You know, it's hard to admit, it's kind of shameful, but that's kind of a human reaction to have. You know, but something we tend to do is that we react before we have time to process the situation. And I think that there's a lot of pressure to react from our communities because we hear the kind of rhetoric that, you know, silence is violence. We want to be supportive of people who may have been victimized. We want to hold space for them, but we don't always take the time to process the situation. So I wanted to stay true to my morals and to my principles and kind of put into practice a real accountability process or a transformative justice process. So I went to person A and I showed them the post. And we had a long conversation in which they were super confused about what was going on. They didn't even understand what the allegations were, and they were adamant that they were not true. They said they didn't even know who posted it or why, which is of course a shocker, like that people are going to deny things, that's human nature. But I got their side of the story, and I had to admit that the timeline of the allegations didn't make sense. We went through their social media posts for the last several years, and it was pretty clear that one of the accusations where they said they had been kicked out of a convention for assaulting a minor couldn't have been true because they had never even been in that state, and their Instagram showed they were in different states going back to the timeline since that convention's inception. So that was a little, put a little bit of doubt there. After we talked, though, person A was still very adamant that if there was something they needed to be accountable for, if there was something they needed to apologize and make amends for, then they definitely wanted to. They just needed to know what was going on. So I was also able to get in touch with a person who was named as one of the victims in the post, and we'll just go ahead and call them person B. The story there was that when person B was 15 and person A was in their 20s, that they had slept together. But believe it or not, sometimes things on the internet turn out to be false. When I spoke with person B on the phone, they told me that they had been of age at the time and were very adamant about saying that they had given clear consent. And additionally, person B was furious and embarrassed that this information was going around the internet about them. So it kind of turned out that a post intent on trying to help victims had really created one. And so the last accusation was about a sexual encounter nearly a decade prior, where the alleged victim had been underage. Yet when I spoke with person A, the only individual they could think of that even matched this description was someone that they claimed had actually assaulted them at a party a decade prior. So I eventually found out who had originally posted the image, and I asked to speak with them in person about accountability. And the person agreed to do that. So I had a little bit more insight into the situation now, but I still wanted to get their perspective, see what information they had, and why they had been putting up this post. I went and I spoke with them at a Starbucks nearby, and after speaking with them for a while, it became pretty clear that there wasn't any evidence to support the allegations being put forth. Person C admitted to only having heard rumors and just feeling very pressured to act and respond and to put up this call-out post. And they really regretted putting it out without having made sure any of it was true first. And so we talked a lot about accountability and what that looked like, and whether they thought if none of the post was true, if they should redact it and apologize. And they agreed that they should. And person C said that they wanted to check up on one other thing and that they'd keep me in the loop. So when I checked in with them a couple days later, person C said that they had no interest in apologizing or redacting because they were still mad about a past situation. Nothing that had to do with assault or anything like that, just something that was an interpersonal problem that had never been resolved. And so when I asked them to take responsibility for their actions, they blocked me on social media. And at this point, I was kind of at a loss. Like, this is not the first time that I've seen somebody falsely accused of things. I actually have friends in prison right now who will sit there for the rest of their lives on false accusations. When we see cases like this, not only does it undermine people who really are suffering, it has a ripple effect out onto so many other people's lives. Anyone who may know the person now or know them in the future is going to be affected by this. And even if this post had turned out to be true, was justice served here in the form of a public internet shaming? Was there a conversation or a process where the person who was harmed and the person who harmed another were even involved? Or was it just a bunch of people on the internet who didn't know either way, engaging in a lynch mob? And like we've seen with so many internet rumors, the same misleading post can pop up year after year. It'll pick up steam again, it'll spread, and people won't even know that it's already been debunked or resolved. And yeah, again, with our current social justice system, our movement, where we're at right now, There's so much pressure on holding people accountable, but I haven't seen a lot of importance placed on making sure that accusations have context and are accurate. And people say they despise these abusers because they're destroying somebody's life. But I think false accusations do the same thing and might make it much harder for real victims to come forward. I think there's a fear here of saying that if you want to make sure that things are true and you want to make sure that you have the facts, then you're an apologist, or you're a sympathizer, or you're a victim blamer. And I've heard people literally say that looking for context is transphobic, or sexist, or racist. If you're not participating in the spreading of rumors, then you're labeled as part of the problem. And to me, that doesn't seem like justice. To me, that seems like a kind of groupthink. And I think it's very easy to ignore our own personal issues and problems when we spend all our time pointing out faults in others. It seems like call-out culture has really devolved into a socially acceptable form of bullying. And I want to reiterate that it's not that people aren't trying to make the world better. I absolutely think that they are. It's just that I think some of these methods can be counterproductive or even detrimental to our causes. And I think I'm qualified to talk about this because I'm guilty of it myself. We have a tendency to not really address people's actual arguments, but instead we attribute negativity and malice to someone's intentions, so we don't have to think about their reasoning and logic and how they got to the point where they have that opinion. It's definitely a defense mechanism for myself, that when I'm challenged, I assume that the other person maybe is just ignorant or bigoted. So that has definitely been a learning process for me. And I wonder if anyone here maybe not liking some of the things I've said are maybe attributing that to me not being aware of my privilege, or me harboring some kind of resentment or bigotry or any other kind of views. So I just want to say that this is kind of a difficult thing to talk about, but I think it's an important thing because so many of us now are caught up in, I think, what is known as virtue signaling, or trying to prove to each other that we are the best possible people, when in truth, we're all just people. We all make mistakes. We all sometimes do the wrong thing. And to me, justice should be about compassion and healing and not trying to destroy each other. And I think not dehumanizing one another is a radical form of abolition. We don't need to destroy and cancel one another to seek justice. I think that's what the punitive system is already doing. We shouldn't be pitting people against each other, but bringing them together. And if we want to do better than the system we have currently in place, then I really think we need to do better and not just different. And that sort of leads into the mission of ABO, which is short for abolition. Here's our mission statement. If somebody would be so kind to read this for me, that would be awesome. Yeah, thank you.
ABO is a collective of creators and activists who work to amplify the voices of LGBTQ prisoners through art. By working closely with prison abolitionist and queer advocacy organizations, we aim to keep queer prisoners connected to the outside community and help them in the fight towards liberation. The profits we generate go back to incarcerated artists, especially those with little to no resources. Using the DIY ideology of punk zine culture, ABO was formed with the philosophy of mutual support, community, and friendship. Our collective is working towards compassionate accountability without relying on the state or its sycophants. ABO believes our interpersonal and societal issues can be solved without locking people in cages. Our mission is to combat the culture that treats humans as disposable and disproportionately criminalizes the most marginalized amongst us. Through artistic activism, we hope to proliferate the idea that a better world means redefining our concepts of justice.
So, since our foundation is rooted in compassion and realizing that people are multifaceted and complex, we know the snippet of someone's life we see posted on the internet is not all that that person is. The worst moment of someone's life you see circulating around is not all-encompassing of their personality, of the things that they've done. And a person is, of course, a complicated makeup of everything that's happened to them in their life. They are not simply good or bad. They are not simply the victim or the abuser. And okay, I want to change gears here just a little bit with a conceptual exercise. We have, of course, Bill Cosby, we have Jared Fogle, Caitlyn Jenner, and Aziz Ansari. And I'm pointing out these examples because these are people that I think a lot of us probably were familiar with prior to being accused of something. We might have viewed them favorably or at least neutral. Some of us might have even looked up to these people, but presumably our minds were changed when these people were either accused or convicted of things like pedophilia or vehicular manslaughter or sexual assault. But I wonder if all the positive things these people have done in their lives are now null and void when you found that out. Do they still have value in our society and in our community? I think they do, and I think we know that people are more than the worst thing than they've ever done. So take, for example, now somebody you probably aren't familiar with. This is my friend Sir Brian, who I've been writing with through ABO Comics for the last 2 years. Sir Brian is 41 years old, a black male, and has been convicted of 4 counts of sexual assault. He is a self-identified homo thug. He's been in and out of prison for a very long time on pretty much the similar charges. So given this knowledge, what are your impressions of this person? Some people say that he's a monster who cannot be changed by any amount of prison time. But I see a person who has not received the right amount of help. So let's learn a little bit about Sir Brian that you wouldn't read in his arrest record. I should probably put some trigger warnings here because this is going to get a little bit intense. Sir Brian was heavily abused as a child by his mother for being effeminate. He was eventually taken away to a Christian group home where he was raped repeatedly by other boys. He developed multiple personality disorder, an alter ego named Devin, who he used as a coping mechanism. He was condemned by his legal guardians in the Christian group home for being gay. He watched as his first boyfriend was murdered in front of him when his boyfriend's father caught them together. Sir Brian turned to self-medicating and sometimes became violent in his dissociative states. He was taken to prison where he was diagnosed with, amongst many other things, severe personality disorder, PTSD, a learning disorder, intellectual disabilities, ADHD, scoliosis, legal blindness, and a seizure disorder. He was prescribed 6 different drugs for these current problems. And even though Sir Brian has served significant prison time, he is committed to learning and growing. He is an advocate for incarcerated queer people and wants to help create unity within the LGBTQ community. He wants to see a world where the things that happen to him never happen to anyone else. And he is desperately in love with his wifey boy Rico, whom he has protected from gangs inside prison. And knowing a little bit of Sir Brian's backstory, does this kind of change your mind and perception of him? Anyone who went through this kind of trauma should not see the inside of a prison cell. They should have help and compassion. Yet we have a tendency towards judgment over compassion. And I think all of us kind of justify our own actions as saying things like, I'm not perfect, but at least I never did that. But what if we shifted our thinking towards considering everyone as having something to teach and something to offer? Our mistake as a society is thinking that accountability for one's actions somehow equates to taking years away from a human being and locking them in a cage. Dehumanizing people is good for our self-conscious when we lock someone away. But what is the actual outcome? And if it's anything other than helping people, is it the right thing to do? I really think the most radical form of justice is forgiveness. And you don't have to just take that from me. You can take that from Ava Kor, who is a Holocaust survivor who spent many, many years traveling around the US and giving her story of surviving Auschwitz. And her story was one of forgiveness and how she found healing in that. And again, you don't have to take it from her either. You can take it from Maya Angelou, you can take it from Gandhi, from Nelson Mandela, from MLK. And I'm not taking that out of context. They really did believe in forgiveness. Bell Hooks has a quote, For me, forgiveness and compassion are always linked. How do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing, and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? And I would love it if ABO Comics could radically change people's minds about justice and help create a more compassionate society. But I'd happily settle for people taking the time to contemplate more compassionate solutions and not just different ones. And I think maybe we should start contemplating this before we find ourselves under the spotlight without a road to redemption. You might be thinking to yourself now, how can I help ABO Comics? Well, you can help either directly or indirectly. You can buy our stuff, that'd be really cool. You could donate to us, and of course, that'll help us help other people. The more we grow, the more we can help people in prison access things like commissary goods, gender-affirming items, legal assistance, medical care, and valuable job training and experience. Buying an original art piece off our site could literally mean buying a fan for someone confined to a 100-degree box for 23 hours a day while recovering from a stroke, which is one of our friends right now who needs help. We're also currently fundraising that was made by our friend Jefferson, where it says, change starts with someone caring. And if you bought this comic book, you are helping us by caring. Thanks to you and people like ABO Comics, our voice will be heard. Change doesn't come fast, but like a journey of 1,000 miles, it starts with one first step, and it will come eventually. Thank you for caring. Spread the word, please. Jefferson made that comic, and we're fundraising for him right now. He's a queer, disabled man in a wheelchair who's on daily insulin shots, who is being deported in just a few days to Brazil, where he has no family or friend support and no money to start over. So that would be very helpful if you could donate for him. But while giving some money today would be absolutely amazing, I would love if everyone took it upon themselves to start up their own projects tomorrow. And I think that's how we can help our communities the most. The more people doing work they care about, the better this world will be. And I think we're all starting that by having these awesome conversations at Creative Mornings. So thank you all for coming today. And I know not everyone's circumstances allow them to start up a project like this. It took me several years to get to the point where I can do this work and I can support myself at the same time. So it takes a long time, but I think you could take the money you take working a couple extra hours a month, and you could help fund the change you want to see. Or you could spend a couple extra hours that month and do the change yourself. And so if neither of these are viable options for you right now, something you could consider doing is maybe just start writing to someone in prison. Develop a friendship and have conversations and learn from them. And something as simple as finding a pen pal and writing a letter could really be life-saving. So whatever you do after you leave today, I know we all want to help make the world better, and I thank you for letting me share my ideas with you. And I just want to end this with a final in memoriam of our friend Joseph, who was killed earlier this year. He would have left prison in April, and he was excited to start a new life as a finally out and proud member of our gay community. But instead, his life was cut short because he was an out and proud gay member of our community in a homophobic environment. Joseph was locked in a cell with a person who had promised to kill him if they remained bunked together. And despite multiple official complaints from Joseph to prison officials, he was ignored until coroners had to come take his body away. And in his memory, we commit ourselves to working towards a world with true liberty and justice for all. So thank you all so much.